Welcome to the Oh Hell No podcast, where Kay Nicole delivers a daily dose of inspiration by discussing passion, purpose, and struggle with people who are living their best life doing what they love. Here's Nicole.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Oh Hell No podcast. Today my voice is a little deeper than usual. I was in Miami for Carnival and I just had a little too much fun. But today we have Tamra Ryan. She is CEO of Women's Bean Project. Thank you for being here, Tamra. Welcome.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Okay, so I'd like to ask you, what did you want to be when you were a kid growing up?
Well, I thought I wanted to be, I think the firmest ambition I had was to be a writer. And interestingly, people said to me at that time, you can't make a living being a writer. And so I sort of let that go and decided to focus on science. And when I went to undergrad, I got a degree in kinesiology because I thought designing shoes for Nike would be like the coolest job ever. But the funny thing is now I look back and lots of people make a living being writers, and there are a lot of ways you can do that. And so I'm a little sad that I was sort of turned away from that, when I was young, because in the long run, I've sort of ended up being a writer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've heard that so much. I've interviewed quite a few people who they wanted to be writers as kids, and someone told them, you will never make money doing that. And some of them pushed on and did it and did make money. And some of them had abandoned it and followed something else until they ended up coming back to it somehow. So it's very interesting that you say that. Let's go back to, what is kinesiology?
Oh, it's the study of how the muscles make the body move. And so I ran track and all the way through into college. And so it seemed like a really interesting way to combine my interests. I was running track, and so I knew what I cared about in terms of shoes. And at the time, Nike seemed to be sort of the ultimate, shoe company to me. And so it seemed like the coolest job ever.
Wow, that's so interesting.
It still seems like a cool job to me, though my path has taken a different direction.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about your path. What is Women's Bean Project, and how did you come to start this organization?
Well, Women's Bean Project believes that all women have the power to transform their lives through employment. And so we hire women who are chronically unemployed. A typical woman we hire hasn't had a job longer than a year in her lifetime, though the average age is 39. And they come to us and work for 6 to 9 months within that range. And they learn the skills they need to work by actually working in our food manufacturing business. Our first product was a bean soup mix. And so that's the genesis of our name. Today we have 50 different food products that we sell across the country. We're in about 1,000 stores across the country, and then online through lots of different relationships. But we were founded in 1989, and our original purpose is still what we're about today, which is teaching women the skills they need to not just get a job, but to keep a job and have a job that is more of a career, where it's going to be an opportunity for advancement and benefits, and really where the employer cares that she comes to work every day.
Tell us about your food manufacturing business, how that started.
Well, our founder was volunteering at a daytime homeless shelter for women. And what she saw was women would come in and use the services of the shelter, and then they'd leave because they'd get a job and they wouldn't need it for a while. But the same women kept coming back over and over again. And at the same time, she noticed that a lot of her friends were eating bean soup sort of for health reasons. And so she invested $500 of her own money and bought beans to make 10 bean soup, and put 2 women to work making the product. And so that was how we started, was with a $500 investment. And today, so we assemble dry food mixes. It's bean soup mix with all the beans you need and the spices. And then we have cornbread mix and brownie mix and all kinds of baking mixes. And then we have spices, but all of that gets assembled at our location in Denver and then distributed from our location in Denver across the country. So the
Wow.
women are involved in all aspects of both the manufacturing or the creation of the products all the way through to the distribution.
So, what is the most enjoyable thing for you about running a business like this?
Well, I had been in business for quite a while before I arrived at the Bean Project, and I would say that if you're lucky in your lifetime, you have an opportunity to have a job that you really get to see the impact of the work. So, yes, we're operating a food manufacturing business and we're only as good as our products. And yet at the same time, we have another business where we're producing, so to speak, women who become great employees. And from the first day, I get to meet them when we hire them, and they come across often as angry or defensive or hopeless. And in a pretty short amount of time, 6 to 9 months isn't that long, they literally blossom. And I think, that is such an amazing thing to be able to witness. And so we have this, business, and the better the business does, the more the women can be served. And to me, that's just a really cool integration of two ideas.
Yeah, that is really cool. So, what is the most challenging part of your day?
Hmm. Well, I think one of the most challenging parts of our work in general is the fact that we hire women and try to meet them where they are and try to help them on a path towards self-sufficiency. And yet at the same time, we can't do that for her. She has to do it for herself. And so we need to bring to bear the resources we have access to. And the work itself is up to each woman. And it's sometimes really hard to watch someone make choices that are taking them backwards, that might take them back to prison or might lead to relapse. And yet at the same time, we also have to recognize that it's her path and her journey, and our job is to be there to help her along that path. But ultimately, it's about her choices and her willingness to and her ability to make change in her life. So to the extent that we can be the coach, then that's our job, but the choices are hers. And I think that's the hardest thing, because we all look at people and it's kind of human nature to say, well, she should do this or he should do that. And the reality is that we can't should our clients or the people we serve into doing their own work, that ultimately it is their own work.
Right. So, are all of the employees that work at your company women who are getting that second chance? Is that the only employees that you guys hire?
Well, so we have permanent staff members. There are 12 of us
Mm-hmm.
in various departments. So, for instance, our accounting person, who's also our HR, and then we have a salesperson and someone who does fundraising for us. So there are 12 staff positions.
Mm-hmm.
And then each year we hire about 60 women to work in the business. And then by definition, they're coming to us to work for a short period of time. We are what's called a transitional employer. And so they are coming to us in order to transition out into the community to full-time permanent employment.
Oh, okay. So, do the women get referred to you from like maybe a probation or parole officer, or is it something that they find on their own, or do you seek them out by going to certain places to find women who are in this situation?
It's all of those things. So the number one source of referrals is someone else who's been in the program. And that's really a reflection of the fact that we've been around for 30 years. And so we'll have a woman and her cousin and her aunt and her sister and her mother, over a period of time. And then we also have relationships with the correction system. So it might be a parole officer, a probation officer, it might be a halfway house or a treatment program or a shelter. Not all of the women we hire are justice involved, but a lot of them are.
So, do you think that's the reason why it's so hard for them to keep employment, is because of the personal challenges, like, getting into trouble with the law, or maybe, I don't know?
Yeah, I think that it's a variety of things. We focus on, in addition to working for us, the women spend 70% of their paid time working in the business in some way, and 30% of their paid time, so 30% of their job, is doing what we kind of call a you job, YOU. It's just you working on yourself. And what we find is that we really need to help the women develop the skills around problem solving and goal setting and planning and organizing, sort of the adulting kind of skills that you need to have to be able to get and keep employment. So it's a combination of sort of not having developed those skills, and then also to a certain extent self-sabotage, or perhaps being not having the skills to communicate. Maybe you have a conflict at work, and rather than work to resolve that conflict, the habit that they have or the pattern that they have is to quit the job. And so it's really teaching them the skills so that they can have a stick-to-itiveness with the job and not quit because there are barriers or issues that come up. And I noticed that a lot of times I'll hear from women that they say, when I was growing up, I didn't know anyone who worked. And so when you think about what that looks like for somebody who didn't have role models for employment, even the simple things like setting an alarm to wake up at a certain time, what are you going to wear? How do you get ready? How do you get everybody in the household ready for the day? If that's not been modeled for you, that can be a really hard skill to develop.
Yeah. It sounds so simple, and like, how can you not know this? But like you said, if it's not something that you grew up seeing or no one told you, then how would you know?
Exactly.
So your program does offer like classes to help these women, learn these skills. So that's the 30% of working on themselves.
Exactly.
So is it costly to run a program like this?
Well, it's very inefficient, I will tell you. And so it costs about roughly $18,000 for a woman to go through our program. And the vast majority of that is her wages. So we're paying her whether she's working on herself or working in the business. And so about 55-60% of our operating budget comes from sales. So the women's wages while they're working in the business are paid for by sales. And then we fundraise to cover the gap, which is the time that they're spending in classes. And so it's expensive if you just say, gosh, for one woman to go through the program, it's $18,000. But that doesn't really take into account the fact that the majority of that 14,000 plus of those dollars are wages, which are an investment in her. I really think of it more that way. It's not just a cost that you won't recoup. When someone works, the community benefit.
Right. So when people donate, how are their funds used? Like, what would be the breakdown of a donation?
Well, all of a donation will go towards supporting program operations. So in some instances, it might pay for the women's wages while they're sitting in a class. Sometimes it'll pay for the instructor. Some of our classes are led by volunteers, and some are by professionals. For instance, we have adult literacy and numeracy course. It's an 8-week course where we work on math and reading skills. And really, every adult in our community could benefit from improving math and reading skills.
Yeah.
But what we find is that the women test at the beginning, they test anywhere from a 2nd to a 7th grade reading level. And so in order for them to move out into the community and have a job where they need to be on computers and things like that, it will benefit them to work on their math and reading. We find that in 8 weeks, they typically go up at least 1 grade level. And that is we pay that company to come in and teach that class, or that it's a nonprofit organization, but we pay them fee for service to come in and teach that class. And so some donations go to support that.
Wow. Okay. And you can donate any amount that you want, right?
Absolutely. And I will say that every amount is appreciated, and the vast majority of our donors are $500 or less. So it's a small gift goes a long way because it all works together to support the women.
Wow. Okay. So what skill set would you say these women lack the most?
Well, I would say the skill set that is most needed in terms of how the world has changed, the world of work has changed, would be computer skills.
Mm,
So I think I mentioned that the average age of a woman we serve is 39. So a lot of the women we serve were not in a classroom during a time when there were computers readily available. And so sometimes we'll hire someone who literally has never turned on a computer, or doesn't know how to open a web browser or create an email and attach her resume. When you think about even just job search today, how it's really done almost all electronically. You don't really go door to door and fill out applications anymore. It's just all done online. So that the lack of that skill of how to navigate both the computer and even online applications and things like that is so essential. And many of the women that we hire have no experience, and those who have some experience often have very little.
that's really interesting. So, could a woman who has, let's say, been married for years and stayed at home with children, didn't work, and then she ends up in a divorce and now she has to go into the working world, is she somebody that's eligible for this program?
Absolutely. And often what we find is that what she has in common with the other women she will be working with is lack of self-esteem and lack of worthiness. I think women in general are vulnerable to those feelings. And regardless of how they got there, whether that is because of a failed marriage or maybe an abusive relationship or because of a history of addiction or incarceration, that is a common thing with the women. And often I say that I think one of the most significant outcomes that happens, of course, we measure a lot of things, but the one most significant thing that happens is a woman graduates our program believing that she's worthy of a better life. And when you think about what that will look like, it might look different for different women, but think of the value of that for someone.
Yeah, it's definitely something that is invaluable. I saw that you guys also provide health services to these women, which is amazing. You, on your site, it lists the services and it says from this facility, like dental exams from Dental at Your Door. Is that a service that is donated by this facility?
So Dental at Your Door is a hygienist who comes in, she takes over one of the offices and does cleanings. And if the women have Medicaid, then she takes that. And if they don't, then she does it pro bono. And everybody who's there, she comes every 6 months, and everybody who's there gets a teeth cleaning. It's really awesome. And then we also have a husband and wife team who are optometrists, and they come in and do eye exams. And then they have all these frames from which the women can choose. And then a week later, they bring them back glasses. And then the local community hospital that, Denver Health, comes with their mammogram mobile and does mammograms on site in their, it's sort of like a big Winnebago. So it's really cool to have these partnerships in the community. It doesn't make sense, of course, for us to do those things. And yet we know that the women need them. So we develop partnerships and bring these services to the women. And then they can do it while they're working. They don't have to take time off work. And that's probably the best part about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Even for, us,
Yeah,
it's terrible
it
when
would
you,
be great
yeah,
if the dentist came to you, wouldn't it?
yes, it would. So what health service would you say these women are least familiar with? Like, is there one health service that hear a lot of women said, oh, I've never had that before?
Well, it's probably a mammogram. And I will also say, though, that the dental service is really essential. And most of them have, getting a teeth cleaning is probably something that they haven't had for a really, really long time. And a lot of them need a lot more dental work than just a teeth cleaning. But I'm personally am kind of neurotic about my teeth. So I do get my teeth cleaned every 6 months. But I think that what that requires is a certain amount of stability in your life, right? To do something every 6 months hopefully you have dental insurance and all those things. And so when you take away stability and insurance and all those things, you think about often people are going years and years and years without seeing anyone for dental care.
Yeah, I'm like that too. I have to get my teeth cleaned every 6 months. It's like it's one of those things. I am
Yeah.
neurotic about teeth too.
And then, it's funny as I think about it, because almost every woman who gets an eye exam needs glasses. And
Mm.
yet very few of them are using glasses before the optometrist comes. And so I think, it's possible that pretty much every aspect of self-care
Hmm.
has been neglected.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So once someone completes the program, what is the process for getting them employed?
Well, we are a partner with the women to help them with the next step.
Hmm.
So at 6 months, at their 6 month evaluation, they receive both the employment review, and then we start their transition out. And so they're going to develop a resume and a cover letter, and then something that's unique to the women that we serve, it is what's called a letter of explanation. And the idea of that is that when a future employer or prospective employer looks at her resume, they're going to see gaps in her resume, regardless of the reason. By definition, the fact that she's at the Bean Project means she has gaps in her employment history. And so we help her develop a letter that explains what has happened in her life and why now is different, and the path that she's on. And that letter of explanation, just even the process of going through that, will help her as she goes out and interviews. It will give her the ability to more easily talk about her past. Then she has a whole slew of mock interview practice where there are volunteers from the community who come in and do interviews, practice interviews with the women. And then she gets a job coach who helps her just with the process of interviewing. And then we do an assessment called Career Scope. And what's cool about that is that the women input in this assessment both their interests and their aptitude. And then it spits out a report for them that is a list of ideas for possible jobs. And what I love about that is it's about possibility, because she might get a couple pages of jobs listed out for her. And when I've looked at these reports, sometimes they're jobs I've never even heard of. But how cool is that? That instead of coming from a place of scarcity where she doesn't have any idea who might hire her, there's a whole bunch of possibilities.
Wow, that is really amazing. I mean, and the feeling that they must get, when they get to that place in the program, it has to be like surreal.
Well, it's scary, first of all, because they will say, "Yes, you hired me, but you're supposed to do that." And yet, I don't think anybody else is going to hire me. And they go from that place being totally afraid to often having multiple job offers
Right, but that's what I'm saying. It's
and being
like,
able to choose.
yeah,
How
I'm
cool is that, right? Like we'd
right.
all love to have that problem.
Absolutely, because like you said, they think that they can't do it, and then all of a sudden it's like, we would like to hire you. We would like to hire, and it's like, wow, I'm at this place. So I'm just saying
Hmm.
it has to be like a surreal moment for them to see themselves go from coming into your program being defensive, maybe not knowing how to turn on a computer, and getting to a place where they're receiving multiple job offers.
Yeah, and in a pretty short amount of time, in the
Right.
in the grand scheme of things, 6 to 9 months is not that long to really set yourself on a different path.
Right. You have to really be focused and, ready to take that step.
Hmm.
So, what is the success rate of your program, would you say?
Well, about 70% of the women graduate the program, and particularly in this economy today, we have a low unemployment rate here in Denver, but they all go on to jobs, or in some instances, they might choose education instead, but they all go on to something. To me, the more important metric, though, is a year later, 95% of the women are still employed.
Mm.
And I think on our website it says 93%, but our most recent statistic is 95. And keep in mind, one of our criteria is that she wouldn't have had a job longer than a year in her lifetime. So to go from never having had, and typically 9 months is kind of that turning point for not having a job longer than a year to being employed at a year. I mean, that's a pretty significant change.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So, for the small percentage of women that don't make it, what do you
Mm-hmm.
think didn't click for them?
Well, I've been in this role for 16 years, and I think I've developed some perspective. And I think what I see is that it wasn't the right time for them. They weren't, for a variety of reasons, they weren't quite ready. I think Women's Being Project is a place you come to create a new life for yourself. It's not a place to come to stay the same. And even though, on the outside, everyone else might say, holy cow, she's not ready now. I don't know when she would be. She has to feel ready and she has to be committed to that change. And sometimes that isn't when others might think that she would be. So I think sometimes it really comes down to timing as much as anything. Maybe she's not far enough away from her addiction, or whether she realizes it or not, she's not quite there yet mentally to make change. What I see, and also what I think is unique about women, is those who tend to be really committed to changing their lives are super motivated by the idea of their relationship with their children. And in some instances, that's getting custody of their children back, or sometimes it's just building their relationship with their kids again, or maybe trying to make sure that their kids don't repeat the mistakes that they made. But that seems to be a huge amount of the motivation that we see in the women who are successful.
That's really great. I love it. So, do you feel that you are doing your purpose work? And if so, what exactly do you think that is? And I'd like you to tell me, when did you realize that you were doing your purpose work?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, I think what I've realized in this work is that when I sit across the table from a woman we serve, except for the accident of birth, I was born to a white middle class family in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and that set me on a path. It doesn't make me special, it's just a fact. And I think that what I see is that we have no difference except for that accident of birth, and the choices I was presented with were different as a result. So that was part of the realization that I had, that what that did is it created for me both a responsibility and humility, maybe humility first, and then realizing as a result, I have a responsibility to help the women share their stories and also to help them help themselves. I don't believe that we can do this work for other people. And I also think that we can be helpful to someone who's ready to change. So a few years ago, I published a book, and it's called The Third Law, which refers to Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And what motivated me to write the book was that I realized that there were biases and prejudices that I brought to the job because of my own life experience. And also that many people in our culture in the US just share, like this idea. It's very much an American mentality that you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you create your success. And I wanted to talk about what it looks like for someone who grows up, again, with no role models for employment, or who has been in the criminal justice system, and what that looks like in terms of being dehumanized, and how we expect as a society that people just sort of figure it out, yet we hold it against them going forward. And so this book was really, I think, a way for me to fulfill this responsibility that I feel, that because the women are disenfranchised from the community in every sense, and I feel a responsibility to help them share their stories. I didn't realize that it would be my calling, but I feel like it has become that, because I can see that they don't have a voice. And I know that I am in a position to share their stories, and until they do have a voice, be their voice or be their representative. I don't take that lightly. I think that I don't want to speak for them. I just want to use my privilege to bring their stories to light.
That's great. And look at you now writing books.
I know. Ironically, I was told I could never make a living being a writer.
Yeah, you can. And you can also share those stories through, these books. Like, because you wrote one book, but I feel like you need to write some more.
Oh, I've started my second book.
Yeah.
Writing a book is quite a process.
I'm sure. I am sure. So this is the Oh Hell No podcast, and I always ask my guests to share an Oh Hell No moment. Oh Hell No moment is just a moment where you literally say, oh hell no, like, is this happening? It could be a positive moment, it could be a negative moment, but it's just a moment that, we all experience sometimes on a daily basis. But I ask that my guests share a moment that taught them something or changed their perspective on something.
Well, there have been many, but one thing that stands out in my mind is we hire a lot of women who are, they're still part of the correction system, but they're living in halfway houses within the community. So they get to leave during the day for a job, but they're paying for the privilege of living in this halfway house and still being sort of incarcerated without being incarcerated. And as I learned more about the limitations that were placed on the women, yet the requirement that they keep a job. For instance, if someone has an infraction within a halfway house, they could shut down the whole do a lockdown is what it's called for the whole halfway house, and not allow anybody to leave or go to their job that day or call their employer. And it was things like that where I thought, how is this possible? And how does somebody, on the one hand, you're requiring that they keep a job, and on the other hand, you're setting up all these barriers for them to keep that job? And that was one of the most significant things that led me to write the book, because I think as a community in general, we don't understand those things. And nobody's talking about how we're just asking the women to become human again and reintegrate into society. And yet all these restrictions are still placed on them that make it hard for them to keep a job and make it hard for them to get their freedom back. And that, I think, that indignity, and also a catch-22 scenario where we make it so hard and yet we blame them for not doing it. And for me, that was oh hell no, I'm not gonna be quiet about this. Before we require things of people, have a better understanding of the impact of the rules on them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good oh hell no moment, because I have also seen that with people that I know who have, been arrested and are going through probation and things like that. They want you to get a job and do all these things, but they make the rules and the restrictions, they conflict with having a job, getting a job, working certain hours, working in certain places. It's kind of ridiculous, and it's like they're setting these people up for failure, and it's really sad. It
is. And that said, at least in Colorado, I'm seeing some focus on trying to change those things in terms of how people are released back into the community. And I really appreciate that there's finally some effort to be much more mindful of trying to set someone up for success when they're released, versus, creating all these barriers and then blaming them for not succeeding.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I commend you for taking that on and writing that book and, contributing in your own way. That's really amazing.
Well, thank you.
So please tell us the name of your book, where we can get it, and then please also tell us how we can learn more about the Women's Bean Project.
Well, my book is called The Third Law, and it can be found at womensbeanproject.com, which is where you can also learn more about Women's Bean Project. And if you are interested in an ebook, you can get both the paperback and the ebook on Amazon.
Thank you so much for your time and for this interview. I really appreciate all of this information. I think it's fabulous.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe and rate the show.